Blessed day everyone. So today we're going to discuss about the history of social work in Europe. So social work developed in Europe during the 19th century by offering support to struggling working class families. It emerged in England and spread through Christian social networks, initially in Western Europe and later in Central Europe. It became professionalized in the 1920s with the appearance of the first social workers who were mostly female at the time. Throughout the 20th century, social work combined the efforts to offer material assistance with a moral approach of readapting working class families. So, taking over the private initiatives, the state and public administrations encouraged the development of social services during the 1960s. Social work thus gradually moved away from the Christian charitable methods, its moral dimension being supplanted by an approach increasingly relying on socioeconomic and psychological knowledge. In the year 1536, an English law was passed stating that alms collected by the local authorities and churches on Sundays, holidays, or festivals were to help relieve the sick and poor, wherein they focused on poor, sick, impotent, and the person with the illnesses who were not able to work. In that year, it is stated in the provision of the law about the illegality of begging, the responsibility of society to help, assistance through the local community, voluntary alms, and under the direction of the state.
Hola! So we are here to discuss the history of social work in Europe. Let's begin. During 1572, overseers of the poor were appointed as civil officers in each parish. Civil officers are a person who exercises authority over civilian affairs. And also that time, parliamentary provided a direct public tax for assistance to the poor and destitute people. So, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth, these laws were enacted. That's why it's called Elizabethan Poor Law. So the Poor Law is a law providing for or regulating the public relief or support to the poor. So what is the purpose of the Elizabethan Poor Law? The Elizabethan Poor Laws, as codified in 1597 to 1598, were administered through parish overseers who provided relief for the aged, sick, and infant poor, as well as work for the able-bodied in workhouse. By the end of the 16th century, England had developed a national sense of civic responsibility. And in 1598, an act was passed and revised in 1601 that established a system of public responsibility implemented through local care and provide a systematic plan for helping the poor.
In 1601, a poor law was introduced to address the issue. The Poor Law put into legislation the right of local justices of the peace for the relief and assistance of the poor, which has played an important role in Europe, United States, and elsewhere. There are three classes of the poor. First is the able-bodied poor, where the parish will provide the means for them to work in a place provided by the parish, which is the workhouse. Second is the impotent poor, where those who cannot work for this relief would come into the form of an poorhouse depending on the circumstances. Last is the dependent children, were they to become apprentices. The system meant that the local parish would administer and organize relief to the poor. In 18th century, there are situations that warranted assistance to the poor. First is Industrial Revolution. Marked a period of development in the latter half of the 18th century that transformed largely rural, agrarian societies in Europe and America into industrialized urban ones. Next is urbanization. Many people left the countryside in order to seek out new job opportunities in nearby towns and cities. Next is slums. Highly populated urban residential area consisting of densely packed housing units of weak build quality. The infrastructure in slums is incomplete and they are primarily inhabited by impoverished people. Last is anonymity. Describes situations where the acting person's identity is unknown. Anonymity is seen as a technique or a way of realizing a certain other values such as privacy or liberty. In these situations, begging, charity, workhouse, orphanages, and jails, there were a lot of attempts to help them in a dignified manner and various programs, both public and private, came into existence.
Before 1834, the cost of looking after the poor was growing more expensive every year. This cost was paid for by the middle and upper classes in each town through their local taxes. There was a real suspicion amongst the middle and upper classes that they were paying the poor to be lazy and avoid work. After a year complaint, a new poor law was introduced in 1834. The new poor law was meant to reduce the cost of looking after the poor and impose a system which would be the same all over the country. Under the new poor law, parishes were grouped into union and each union had to build a workhouse if they did not already have one. Except in special circumstances, poor people could now get help if they were prepared to leave their homes and go into a workhouse. Conditions inside the workhouse were deliberately hard, so that only those who desperately needed help would ask for it. Families were split out and housed in different parts in the workhouse. The poor were made to wear a uniform and a diet was monotonous. There were also strict rules and regulations to follow. Inmates, male and female, young and old, were made to work hard, often doing unpleasant jobs such as picking aukum or breaking stones. Children can also find themselves hard out to work in the factories or mines. There was 3 poor law commissioners. First is the assistant commissioners. Assistant commissioners were responsible for local inspection. Second is the chief executive officer. The chief executive officer was a civil servant who was the permanent secretary to the poor law board. And lastly, the president of the board. The president of the board was an MP. In practice, the Poor Law Board did not exist as an organization. In 1869, Octavia Hill and Edward Denison founded the charity organization Society to investigate the conditions and the mood of life of the poor. Her crusade for preserving recreational open spaces in the city was a consequence of her knowledge of the crowded environment of the poor people in London and resulted in the foundation in 1895 of the National Trust for Places of Historic Interest or Natural Beauty.